understand you now.
You're fulfilling your destiny.
Show me again the power of the darkness.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll. D20radio.com.
The dark side.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to the Knights of Ren episode 205. This week we have Jay and Rick as our hosts. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey.
This week we're going to be talking with Jay about his interview and the deck he took to tournaments that he's been winning with, and so on and so forth. So, Jay, why don't you give us a breakdown? You've gone to a couple tournaments and done well with Jango, Trooper, eBala. So let's hear what was it like? How big were the tournaments? What did you see? What did you play against? Things like that.
So the last two Saturdays we had events over at Outflank Games in Fairfield and Eudaimonia in Berkeley, which is both of my usual stomping grounds. At Outflank we had 30 people, which was pretty awesome. A lot of cool people came from all over. One nice thing about my area is a lot of people travel pretty hard to get to these events, so the turnouts are usually pretty solid. Saw some Jango Veers, some Vader Raiders, some Vader Jabba action. A lot of my friends run a plethora of those decks. There was some Poe hired guns and some Ackbar. And there was even a Grievous Dooku, which was pretty cool. That was my first round opponent. Yeah, so I'm still running, my deck has evolved a lot and has kind of changed characters and shapes and forms, but I'm still running the eBala-Tik Trooper and Friend, as we jokingly call it between us, because that slot kept mixing around way early in the game. It was Veers, and then I tried out Phasma, and then now we're up to Jango, and it's just interesting how the decks evolve, but it's always been mostly the same shell. And it's interesting to me that this deck is sort of gaining popularity recently, and I'm not sitting here saying I necessarily pioneered it. Tiny's had his version that he was brewing for a while, and I've been talking on the podcast. All you listeners, you've been there, quote unquote, with me, and my friends in my local meta have seen me create this deck over time. It's now really, really starting to hit a stride. Adding Jango at first seemed sort of like an experiment. We can try this, but the Phasma build having more range for the best defense and more focus, and the Guardian seemed this is the way the deck is supposed to be played, but it sort of shifted it into a mid-range. And so when Jango got added, cards like Armed to the Teeth got more potent because you have two targets, so you're more likely to get that card off. And I still, I was talking about that card back on the Phasma list, but Armed to the Teeth, it really closes games. It really kills off characters that you're able to get a decent amount of damage through. If you time it right, you can pop them before they add shields to guys. So again, that card's always amazing. But now with the Jango edition, the real shining star has been Fight Dirty, which a lot of people, were thinking that's in the Jabba Jango list or even the Jango Bala list, if that was what people were playing. But starting with 3 dice and then adding in On the Hunts and jetpacks, if you get, you have 3 to begin with, paying 1 for 3 is a lot of damage, and for every upgrade you add to that pool. At the Eudaimonia event over the weekend, one of my opponents, I got Rey down to 6 left, so I had 4 damage on her. And I was able to fight dirty for all 6 of my dice. I had both jetpacks and 1 on the hunt, and I blew Rey up before she got to activate for that round. And then in the next round, I rolled everything out and killed the Padawan with another 6 damage one and a backup muscle. So the ability to do indirect or sideways or whatever phrasing you want to say, damage-wise, is huge. And there's some things about the deck that I'm noticing, because I've been seeing more people pick it up, but I feel like there's some strategy that comes with the deck. It's not just a super simple aggro deck. There are like decisions to be made and ways to manipulate your dice, and I often make choices of like just how much do I feel like I need to fiddle with my rerolls, or like what am I going to roll out first, or what do I throw on Arm to the Teeth, and if I'm going to play certain cards like Jetpack or Holdout Blaster, or if I'm just going to save up for defense. Like there's a lot of round by round choices that can be made that I think impact the deck a lot, and I want to go into that a little more. But first off, a lot of you have been asking me still like what the list is, and I keep like pumping out like little updated ones, but we're going to go through the proper list again quickly, and then we'll explain again some of the cards that have been added and why. But right off the top, the deck has 12 upgrades. It has 2 DH-17s, 2 F-11Ds, 2 Holdout Blasters, 2 Jetpacks, 2 On the Hunts, and 2 Hunter Downs. These are cheap, efficient weapons that do not cost more than 2. Hunter Down is more of a stall play. I mean, the shields are nice, but I don't often play the card unless I really need it, or I need cheap ammo for Arm to the Teeth. But Hunter Down is like sort of a nice to have, but not a need to have. But I still like the card a lot. Like for a while I was considering, when I was making cuts for On the Hunt, I thought of cutting Hunter Down and keeping promotion, but I think I like that it costs 0. And again, in some situations, when the mirror or playing against certain decks, the stall that it brings you is really important. And I mean, shields are never bad too. I just play against a lot of melee invaders, so I have mixed results with it. But yeah, as far as upgrade goes, DH-17, super cheap, reliable pistol that's amazing to start a round off with, slapping on Jango, and now 1-die Jango turns basically back into 2-die Jango. You still have resources to pay for shots, you have resources to play for your removal, or you can just save it and be up next round. So I like DH-17. I see a lot of threads saying like, what's the best gun, and I think DH-17 is just really nasty. F-11D, arguably still in my book like the best gun in the game because it has 4 damage sides, only costs 2, and has redeploy. That weapon like never disappoints. And it gets really scary when they go down to 1 target, because then its special side is just too easy damage. So F-11D, can't say enough about it. Holdout Blaster, I actually, I have this in the deck, and there are times to play it, and I really like it. It's not usually my go-to. It's not something I keep in my hand very often. Again, it's another DH-17, but it's a little more expensive, and it comes with a shield side, or is a resource side, one of the two. And either way, it's to me it's really expensive, and unless that action is really going to matter, it's paying a lot for what may not help you out in the long run. So if I have the choice between Holdout Blaster and some removal, I tend to play the removal. But obviously you gotta go case by case. I also like to, sometimes if I have it out early and I draw an F11 later, I'll overwrite with the F11, because to me it's just strictly better. Obviously you have to play around what your opponent's doing. I mean, if you can get some use out of the redeploy, then it's a lot better, depending on the shape of your characters and things like that. I don't know. I'm not Goff or Holdout Blaster, but it definitely has its place in the list. Jetpack, as I've said before, I don't necessarily rush this out either. It's better against melee decks, for sure. It's not crazy reliable. It's more helpful when you have, a couple of other guns out already and more base damage sides. And Ballast Focus obviously helps with it too. Yeah, Jetpack can be really feast or famine. I still really like it, and it synergizes with Fight Dirty, which is always great. I try to play DH-17 or F-11 first, unless I'm playing against a melee deck. I still like Jetpack, but yeah, so if you can't roll that damage side, like it's not doing a whole lot for you, and it's only got a 1/3 chance to do it, so you gotta keep that in mind, and depends on who's alive and what you got going on. So yeah, those are the upgrades.
Well, don't forget, you still have On the Hunt.
Right, so that was the most recent addition, and that replaced promotion. And there are a couple of thoughts around that. I really liked promotion in this deck because you slap it on the trooper and no one's going to bother the trooper. It can give you money, it can give you focus, it can give you more damage. So it was, to me, I've always liked promotion over datapad because to me it mostly does the same stuff and it can help you hurt more. But moving forward, On the Hunt is a really interesting card because it costs 1. It's a yellow villain upgrade. Its sides are plus range, plus melee. Discard, 1 discard. Special, miss. And the special is you can remove all the shields off of a character, and then you can pay 1 to remove a character or upgrade die. This card has done so much work. If I choose to go first and they slap their shields on whoever, whenever this hits shields, it feels great. Being able to remove like their whatever their die is for 1. And I remember looking at this card early and thinking like, man, paying 1 to like remove a die seems like a lot, but it's basically, I mean, you're often paying 1 to electroshock or 1 to flank, and this just, is an equal opportunity like removal. Like it actually, the things it doesn't hit are like supports, which aren't crazy popular right now outside of Falcon. So it pretty much hits everything. Like, I'll say air quotes, everything. I mean, you get my point. It's cheap. It eats shields, so a lot of decks, heroes especially, play a lot of shield cards. And this just isn't afraid of it at all. And again, being able to remove on the spot dice for 1, I've found to be extremely valuable. And since this deck is so cheap and so efficient, I'm often very happy to roll that out first, see if I get that, and play my turn accordingly around my On the Hunts. And I still find it like good and useful, even if they don't have shields at the time. It also just makes them hesitate to even get shields, which can be really useful. And again, it's a yellow die and it combos with Fight Dirty, so card's amazing. It's a staple in the deck, and I'm liking the card overall. Like I'm gonna probably find myself playing a lot of On the Hunt in any villain yellow deck I make now. If I was squeamish about it because it can't make money, and I thought that was a huge detriment, but it's mattered. The 2 special sides really sell it for me. Like you will very likely see that pop up.
Yeah, but the resources in this deck, you're not too strapped for cash, if you will. It's you made a conscious effort to keep your upgrades to less than 3 resources, so having the trade-off of being able to get rid of shields and being some sort of dice manipulation against your opponent versus the promotion, which can only go on 1 character in this deck too. So I think it's definitely a better trade-off.
Yeah, and again, I also in my earlier evaluations, my deck's improved a lot, especially when I made the decision to keep it under 2 or under costed period. When it had IQAs and it had Phasma and Commanding Presence, it's a lot harder to keep that money around. But yeah, now it just fits like a glove, and I haven't ran into a game where I've played it and I've been disappointed with its performance. It's really good. So next up, we have 16 event cards. We have Tactical Mastery, the best defense, Cannon Fodder, Armed to the Teeth, Fight Dirty, He Doesn't Like You, Electroshock, and Flank. So the easy ones to talk about first: Flank, Electroshock, He Doesn't Like You. Those are your simple spot removal cards to get rid of targeted dice. One thing to keep in mind is if you have Flank in your hand, definitely consider not rolling Jango out as soon as they roll their stuff. You are allowed to see what they roll before you decide to activate Jango. It's after activation, and part of activation is rolling the dice. So you can see what they roll, choose to activate Jango for his ability, but maybe by rolling Jango, you lose the ability to play Flank. So keep that in mind. I actually stall Jango a lot when I have Flank in my hand, if, depending on who I'm fighting and what they're trying to do and what upgrades might scare me. Electroshock, removal, 2 or less removal hits nearly every die in the game. Perfect. He Doesn't Like You, Jango's best friend. When Jango rolls those crappy money sides or the melee. Sometimes the melee is relevant, but if he rolls bad, He Doesn't Like You with it and move on. We also have the best defense and Cannon Fodder. Now, we have 4 cards that can only hit your Stormtrooper, which seems excessive, but in my experience, it just means that you're very likely to see one of these and get the most out of your Stormtrooper, because a lot of this deck is making your Stormtrooper kind of live on the edge and beat the crap out of him, and pulling away like, specific things. Obviously the best defense is great if you can net 3+ value. If you're seeing Vader 3s and Kylo Sabers and all those nasty sides pop up and you net more damage than what you would have taken in general, obviously it's good. But pulling away special sides, getting rid of force throws, or just making sure Bala or Jango aren't getting beat up, this card, it does it all.
Well, let's take a second with the best defense and cannon fodder. One of the things about this, you have 2 high priority targets on your side, Jango and Elite Bala. So the trooper is going to mostly get ignored throughout the game. The only time they're really going to go after him is if they can just kind of plink him off and they can't really do measurable damage to either Jango or Bala. Is that something that's been happening when you've been playing this?
Yeah, you're trying to take as much heat off as you can, or just, make it as tricky as possible. And one thing I've been doing too, actually, I should have mentioned when talking about Jetpack, I've actually been really happy to roll shields on Jetpack. If I see that side, then I just, basically bulletproof vest. Usually Bala is the one they focus first. I don't try to reroll it if I get that 2 shield side. So keep that in mind. That can be extremely valuable and save you on discarding stuff depending on what you have, or if you're trying to keep things. Don't be upset about the 2 shield side. It can do a lot.
You're not trying to just outrace your opponent here with this deck either, right? Like this is kind of a slow, grindy, take your time, not like the usual, like a Jango Veers where you just want to deal damage and claim the battlefield and get to the next round, right?
This deck can go at the pace of the round fairly easily. I mean, up against, like Jango Veers, it's pretty much like how fast can I pop one of his guys off before, they risk killing one of mine. But in any other time where it's slower, the biggest thing that I try to control, again, I've mentioned this before, but is like just making sure that I get that battlefield, and I'll explain a little more on like battlefield tactics when we get to that, and tips and tricks I want to explain in the deck. But a little more on cannon fodder. Cannon fodder was my other late addition that impacted greatly my success at Outflank in the 30-person tournament. Just being able to play upgrades, run out of money, and still threaten or remove dice and shift it over to the trooper 2 times. In fact, it was both of my matchups against Jango Veers, and I'm not saying this is always going to work out as clean and perfect for you guys, but same scenario happened twice where they rolled out a bunch of damage. They didn't have money left over, and so it was mostly combinations of 1 natural ranged, 2 range for $1, and then a plethora of modifiers, and I was able to both times cannon fodder away the 1 natural range, and they couldn't pay for the 2 damage, and both times Bala's ticket would have been punched had I not done that. It was kind of funny to me that happened multiple times in the event, but just the ability to play cannon fodder for free. I mean, so much of this deck is free. The other thing is, like, I played against a Kylo player, and there's a couple of Kylo players in my local meta, and another thing that's nice is Kylo's really good against, the luxury decks and the heavy control, but he might hit you for 2, rarely, and that's all you have to worry about, and a lot of times he won't hit you for anything. So just another cool thing with, like, a lot of these zero-cost cards.
Yeah, you have 6 cards in the deck that cost 2. Everything else is 1 or less.
With that said, Tactical Mastery, I keep going back and forth on this card. It's really interesting because when it's good, it made like one of the plays of the game for me. And the amount of strategic depth that this card gives you is enormous on doing tricky plays like comboing out like more bonus equipment, or like rolling Bala and Jango and then going into a big ol' fight dirty, or using equipment and then throwing it with arm to the teeth, or all sorts of like little cheats that allow you to use again your indirect damage cards to their fullest, or just suddenly dropping backup muscle as a surprise play on the top of Tactical Mastery to kill someone before they resolve their dice. I've done that. So it's interesting because you don't always draw it, you don't always see it, and when you have it, you don't always have like the opportunity to make the most of it. So if you're not having a lot of success with this card, this is definitely one you can cut down to one or even cut out. I think you should always run one, but it's been funny in that there are a lot of games where it doesn't do anything. I still stand by the idea that when it's good, it's too good to pass up. Lastly, again, we have Armed to the Teeth, which again is pay 0, yellow villain, remove any number of upgrades from a yellow character you control and deal damage for each. And again, it's just like you resolve the damage on the dice, or your guy's about to die, and it's just as an action, you can throw your DH-17. You can throw your like jetpacks and your dice that you won't get back or they won't redeploy. And in some cases, if you get the kill and you get the reset on Bala, even if you have to sacrifice his upgrades, getting the kill to get the reset to potentially do more can be relevant. So Teeth comes up all the time. I notice some people only run one. I almost every single game play it. I'd hate to only have one and discard it. There's even been games where I've played both, but I would very, very strongly suggest running two. You're more likely to have both of them go off, or have one to go off, and make that impactful play instead of wishing you had it. Because there's definitely games where it would be your closer, and even with two of them, I've dug and dug and dug through my deck trying to find them to get that finishing strike. And I'll even towards the end of a game like discard my hand if I know they're coming. To help me like close out. So another strategy to consider. And then Fight Dirty, for those who aren't familiar, is pay 1, yellow villain, remove any number of yellow dice from your pool and deal damage to a character equal to the number removed. This card hits like a truck. It saves you immense action economy if you make a mediocre roll. Because you have to remember, so like as far as dice damage value goes, every die in your deck can deal 2, and if you roll well, sure, it'll deal 2 and everything will be great and the stars align. But when you roll poorly and you sacrifice resources and you sacrifice cards to reroll over and over to try and get those into numbers that you like, you are paying to make these dice work for you. And if you pay a lot and you reroll and you reroll and you reroll and you lose tempo, or they put shields up, or you lose the battlefield, or all these things, like sometimes those costs outweigh that potential damage. And so instead of getting no damage out of it, if you can get 1 damage per your yellow die, sometimes it's all you need. And then you can just look at it as like, how much did I get for paying 1? Did you deal 2? 2, sometimes you pay that on a die, and that's enough. If you get 3, great. 4, awesome. In the Eudaimonia game, I got 6, and that was just absurd. It never feels bad. It always feels awesome for being able to resolve quickly and just go, all right, these aren't working for me, and get damage anyway. I can't, again, it's another card I can't say enough. Run 2 and have fun with it. And, you have to play around it some. Like, you always want to get Ball out early for the kill so that he gets the reset, but you roll him out, they roll out or do something. You get Jango out, and then you have that 3, maybe 4 yellow dice going. And if they don't do it, man, just fight dirty. Just get up and go.
So what about the battlefield?
The last card is Backup Muscle, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. But the battlefield, here's one of the things that I noticed people playing the deck differently need to consider what this deck's trying to do and what it makes it strong. And maybe, I don't know. To me, Separatist Base is the battlefield for this deck. Again, because this deck capitalizes as much as possible on indirect damage using the aforementioned Backup Muscle to fight dirty, Armed to the Teeth. And so, Separatist Base, if you play this deck correctly, you should almost always claim. You should almost always have the ability to claim. And especially when you whittle them down to their last character, you should definitely claim. This battlefield invalidates things like shields. Those nasty dug-ins that people try to play to like stabilize. This card doesn't care. And again, you have cards like On the Hunt that doesn't care also. But I feel like if you're playing some of these more like, there's a lot of battlefields that work with this deck, but I feel like you're losing a lot of damage and a lot of your ability to close with all of these finishers, ignoring this battlefield. And it's tricky to play, and if you're not great at controlling the battlefield reliably, you know, it can hit you back, it can bite you back. But as you get better at playing this deck, like Separatist Base like carries you, and being able to deal damage, claim, and then just have the ability to like claim or back up muscle and claim before they can roll out and do anything substantial is enormous. And again, that's the whole point of this deck, is maximum indirect damage. If you're doing something else, if you really like don't feel comfortable with it, I would actually strongly suggest you run like the like double Phasma variant with the mostly red cards, using like Commanding Presence. Like using a different battlefield to me feels like a completely different deck, and you're leaving a lot of the pressure on the table. And again, obviously there are games you play where you don't get your battlefield, so then it has to function without it. But I'm saying, like, you know, when I play this deck and I win initiative, I always go first against whatever. And like that was one of the reasons why I really liked On the Hunt, is giving me that confidence of just like, sure, they have shields, we'll get through it. Literally. Again, I think if you want to run this deck, you got to run Separatist Base.
So can you give us a sample turn in which you would claim Separatist Base? Because it sounds like you would roll eBala-Tik first, Jango on your opponent's action. Then your second technical action would be resolve damage. And then do you roll the trooper and then resolve him and then take the battlefield? Or do you just let the trooper stay? Like, can you give us some examples of, like, obviously each game is different. Each interaction is different, but you're saying, like, you know, you want to take the Separatist Base as soon as possible. So for you, what is the soonest that usually happens more often than not?
There's a difference between as soon as possible and definitely before your opponent. Typically, yeah, in a turn, like I try to roll Bala first. He's the guy that opponents tend to go after initially. Obviously, getting him out sets him up for the reset, all that kind of stuff. Generally, I always try to put an upgrade on Jango. The moment he has an upgrade, he's pretty much back to full fighting form. Rolling out Trooper is an interesting decision. It can save you turn and action economy depending on what you're trying to do. If you want to get him out there first and then try to go for the reroll, or reroll earlier if you're at that deadlock where you're both going to start rerolling to hit each other. If it seems like they're trying to go in on you, definitely, you know, don't worry about Trooper. I mean, he can hit really hard. Like, Trooper's definitely relevant, but that is something that I play around a lot, is, you know, do I roll Trooper or not? He's great to have. He hits hard. But when Trooper rolls poorly, like, that action might have hurt you. So, yeah, that's a good thing to consider Sudi bringing up. But, yeah, always remember, too, because Separatist Base does the damage, you know, you can give up 1 or 2 damage on your dice sitting there. Like, if you have that Jango damage, like 1 melee sitting there, like, I almost never resolve that if that's my last die. I just made sure to get the battlefield. And obviously, claiming the battlefield is a skill, you know, reading your opponent if they're going to try to get it from you first. You know, if it's clear they're going to want to get their money or going to want to try and get their shields. I'm not saying I never take, like, that standalone melee damage, but I don't prioritize it if I can get the battlefield. Speaking of Jango real quick, and something that I hear come up a lot in regards to him that I find interesting is Jango, you know, he hits hard, everybody loves him, his effect is incredibly powerful to the point where people ask for nerfs. I don't agree with that, but that's not what we're talking about. What I want to bring up, though, is I'm surprised, personally, how much people value Elite Jango. Because to me, yes, his ability is incredible, and, like, it's all in, and it hits hard. And so, obviously, you want Jango to hit as hard as possible. But when you look at his cost, he's 12 for 1 die, and then he has a 4-point jump to 16 for 2. And personally, one of the things I love about this deck is I don't want the second Jango die. I feel like at 12 you get incredible value, and at 16 I don't personally. I mean, yeah, it's got 2 base damage sides. Like, that melee side sucks. It's damage, like, yeah, but I don't know. I like having, like, the trooper as the assist and the 2 bala die, and then I just feel like the moment I slap a gun on him, like, you know, he's golden. He's back to being his 2 die self, and you can say, well, if you have 2 die and a gun, then he's even stronger. And while, yes, that's true, I really, like, I don't know. I think, I guess I'm going to start getting a little conceited here. I think this is the best way to run Jango. I think, you know, there are other cool lists, but man, that 16 points is a lot of your point economy, and I personally don't feel 4 points is worth second Jango die, that it doesn't always do what you want. I almost consider it like a 1 out of 3 for damage, which is not what you're looking for. You know, the trooper is 50% for damage, and like, I love that trooper. So just something to consider. I mean, I don't know if what do you guys think? Like, that's just the concession I've come to. I don't want to pay 16 for Jango.
Yeah, you're paying a lot. You're paying 4 extra points to be able to get maybe a little bit more money and a melee side, you know, a little bit more damage. And I see where you're coming from. The eBala-Tik 3 cost jump to elite, for one, you know, makes you able to make this pairing. But with that, you're gaining another focus, and you get, you know, a shield that is relevant in this deck. I think you're getting way more out of Elite Bala than you are out of Elite Jango in this particular deck. I mean, you don't need the money, right? We've already gone over that you don't really need any more than the 2 resources that you're getting in a turn. So I don't see a reason to have, especially another modified resource side. And yeah, again, that ability doesn't care if it's elite or not. He's going to get his ability either way. And I think it's perfectly fair to run him with 1 dice. And it also doesn't make him such a threat either. You know, like, you see 2 dice on Jango, your opponent's going to want to get rid of those 2 dice as soon as possible. But then now you got 2 dice on Bala, so they kind of are forced to make a choice to, do I let the action economy of Jango go and go after Bala to get rid of the extra dice when his ability is only going to trigger maybe once in a game, maybe twice. You see what I'm saying? It kind of leads your opponent to go after another character, and Jango can still get loaded up and again still be almost as efficient with the damage.
For those who like Jango and want to run him elite, like, he's good as elite. I just personally, I won't even say he's overcosted, because again, he hits like a truck, and it's what makes him good. But I personally enjoy that I can get a lot out of him for 12. So yeah, just like what Rick's been saying, like, the threat and his ability is still there, you know, even at 1 die. Just a lot of people have told me, you know, like, can't believe you only run 1 die Jango. And I don't know, to me, it's the way to go.
There's a couple things to talk about. If you listen to our episode from last week with Corey Kneska, he changed my entire perspective on deck building, because he was specifically talking about Jen Erso, and at 15 points she has dice and she has an effect, and for 5 more points she goes up to 20, which is 2/3 of your deck build points. You get 1 extra die, but her effect doesn't actually get any better. And so he was basically talking about, when you're paying for the elite cost, are you paying for extra damage? Are you paying for a card effect to text to become stronger? What are you paying for? And so when looking at this deck, it makes sense that Jango at 12 is really strong. Jango at 16 isn't as strong for a couple of reasons. First of all, having 3 characters in the deck is great. You get lots more health. You have targets your opponent now has to deal with, because if you have 2 Jango, 2 Bala, they're probably going to try and kill Bala first. Now you have 1 Jango, 1 Bala, and 1 Trooper. Well, now you have options for flank. Now you have red in your deck build, so now you have access to things like tactical mastery, best defense, can fodder, so on and so forth. You've given yourself flexibility, but you're not paying for it. If you pay those extra 4 points, are you efficiently getting what you need out of the deck? I don't think you are, because you want that extra 7 health from Trooper. You want that extra die, the extra red. All of those things are coming out of 4 points you're not spending. And I think that's extremely viable. And that's just something to consider when you're deck building. Like, if you're paying for, say, you know, Vader, Are you really getting what you need out of those 21 points? Luke, so on and so forth. Do you just bring a character for the single die because you need the effect? Or are you going to bring a really punchy character with 2 dice? Like, that's a very viable deck construction thought when you're starting to look at building a deck, tweaking the deck, and making adjustments. And like you said, throwing a equipment on Jango makes him nasty for 2 resources instead of 4 points in the deck.
Yeah, and you can even take it a little bit further and look at some of the other characters out there, like Leia. Her dice are pretty good. 1 damage, 2 range damage, 2 for 1, a focus, and a resource. But more importantly, her ability actually goes off of the number of dice that you bring with her. That 4-point jump from 12 to 16 makes sense with Leia. You're paying a little bit for a decent die, and you're paying for a little bit more use out of the ability. But again, with Jango and some other characters, the ability doesn't scale with the dice necessarily.
A lot of characters that actually do scale well are heroes. You're looking at things like Poe Dameron, Padme Amidala. Their effects trigger off of special sides. So having more of their dice actually is beneficial because you have a higher probability of getting their effect off. Whereas, Captain Phasma, if you bring her with 1 or 2 dice, her effect isn't affected by the number of dice you have. It's affected by your non-unique characters. So these are just things to consider, that sometimes it's better to take a single character with a single die and then put other options into the deck, which give you color options, flexible options. It gives you more health. It gives you a wider range of targets for now your opponent. Instead of dealing with 2 characters, they have to deal with 3. And that can be difficult, especially if you have control cards, because you can mitigate enough damage where you're spreading the damage across so many characters that no one's going to die anytime soon.
To put a pin in it, the last thing I'll say, too, is we're not saying that his effect doesn't scale with more dice. There's clearly another die means another opportunity to roll damage. My point is just if you're trying to squeeze him out as hard as you can for damage, you have to remember that his plus resource side is practically a miss. His melee side, it can be damage, it can be relevant. It combos with On the Hunt, and you can knock off hunter downs, and sometimes it's super relevant and you want it, and sometimes you just need 1 damage. But pound for pound, you're paying 4 for that die that only does some damage most of the time. And I'm not saying you can't get benefit out of it, or sometimes he made you a lot of money or whatever. But again, we're just saying think very critically about what you're paying for when you make the jump, because again, that was a really awesome discussion about, are you paying for more of the effect? Are you paying for another really great die? Which I'm not saying Jango's is bad, it's just I consider his die a B as opposed to an A, like most red damage or red dice, which bring you the 50% damage. His it is 50%, but again, the melee side,
So a couple of things I definitely want to pick your brain on. First of all, what is a strong opening hand that you don't want to see, and how would you play some of those cards out? So, you were saying you want to see a DH-17, and you said you want to put it on Jango. What else do you want to see, and how would you play those cards?
In my opening hand, if I have an upgrade, I tend to keep it. Just because sometimes you're going to run into hands in this deck because it's so event heavy. I have run into times where I didn't get an upgrade or the one I'm looking for. And again, I don't like to start with Holdout Blaster. I like to use it for tricks or to play it, try to resolve it, and then teeth it or something. So I try to make sure I hang on to an upgrade. The zero costers are all great. He Doesn't Like You, Cannon Fodder, all those are excellent because then I'm more comfortable again, opening with a jetpack, opening with an F11. Typically on turn 1, you're safe to play a 2-coster and go for it and worry more about defense, round 2, round 3, but that also depends, are you up against Vader? Are you up against Jango Veers? How much can they hurt you? Maybe you should focus more on removal. So I always tend to keep He Doesn't Like Yous. I always keep the best defense because you can, against decks like Vader Raider, you can just take off both of his dice and just basically skip him for a turn, which often makes a huge impact. Try to make sure though that he rerolls or tries to manipulate his dice, and also respect Force Strike. God, it's so hard to play around Vader. Ugh. I tend to hang on to best defenses. I tend to hang on to he doesn't like you. Just he doesn't like you is easy, and like sometimes it's all I use Jango's die for is to just respond and remove and sigh relief. Electroshock and flank a little less so. I mean, they're always good, but they do cost you a resource. Obviously, DH-17 is great. F-11 is great. Jetpack's fine, better against melee. I'm okay with it turn 1. I'm less okay spending all my money on it later as it gets a little weaker over time. But again, another point I did want to make, though, about this deck to consider that I've been doing is if I roll shields, I take them now. And it's helped a lot stabilizing Bala, stabilizing Jango, or even stabilizing the Trooper using like fodder and best defense on him. One thing you should try is in this deck, if you roll shields, hang on to them or see if they're impactful and you still can make plays with the rest of your dice, because I've been taking shields a lot and it's mattered against some of the harder hitting stuff. So yeah, definitely 1 or 2 upgrades. I guess more importantly, cards to throw back. Holdout Blaster, you don't want to start with an arm to the teeth. It's usually not going to be useful the first 2 rounds. Fight Dirty's fine, actually. Sometimes that 3 is all you need, although I tend to throw it back. Tactical Mastery isn't usually going to do anything for you super early. One thing to consider, backup muscle is really good. It's not always good out turn 1, I've felt now, depending on where your tempo's at and if you're actually threatening to kill someone with it or not. I mean, putting more damage out there is great. Making sure you resolve all 3 damage is great. I mean, you have to keep those things in mind. But do keep in mind your tempo that you're already working with, your money. I've now slow rolled my backup muscles in favor of better removal, and it's another thing to consider with this deck is backup muscle is great. It's damage, it gets through. There's nothing they can do about it. But if you aren't killing people with it, it's not always like having an actual impact on the game, and it can slow you down a lot.
The next questions I have are matchups. So there's going to be, you're going to see a lot of standard matchups. So I want to ask, how does this deck fare against, X? So the first deck, you're playing this versus Jango Veers. Like, what are your strong points? What are your weak points?
So Jango Veers, it's a race. It's who can roll good, quickly, and you in that matchup you're playing against their speed for the first 2 rounds. So more emphasis on removal early on, because you can pretty much go pound for pound just trying to use the damage your deck provides by itself. The real skill test of this matchup is dueling Jangos. Both of you trying to use your deck to their fullest to bait the other one into resolving first. I've been fairly successful in this matchup lately. I strongly attribute that again to cards like On the Hunt and Cannon Fodder and Best Defense, and just strongly utilizing my removal options to mitigate the damage as best I can and squeak out killing Veers. That 1 health, I honestly feel like makes a big difference on who to go for first, and getting just 1 guy off the table makes it so much easier to breathe. The challenge is fighting, leaving Jango up. You are then, of course, again, every turn you have to respect his resolution. But in practice, just knocking Veers off early, because they tend to put shields on Jango and keep him alive the longest. I try to go for that early kill just to remove all those dice, and Jango by himself is scary, but again, he doesn't always roll super well, and when your opponent favors like jetpacks as the upgrade of choice on him, both of those are only like 1/3 chance of landing on range damage and landing on jetpack's bonus damage, so you have a little bit of breathing room if they play to those strengths. It's not always the case, but I do see people like rely really heavily on that, and you are kind of safe rolling into him if that's what he's got. I mean, obviously he could turn around and blow you out for 7 damage, and that's all they wrote. Tactical Mastery plays hugely in this, being able to play around Jango. Again, it's a heck of a lot of like, the Jango dance and using your hunter downs and using your backup muscles and all your little fiddly actions to try and drain them out before you helps a lot. But also be aware that sometimes the best way to deal with Jango is to just bum rush him and try to get the trigger out early and just see where the dice lie, literally. Obviously, it's more dangerous if that's going to cause you to lose a character, but if your characters are fairly healthy, I kind of just run out there and try to get them to activate early.
Okay, tell us about the matchup between Vader and Raider.
So, this is the deck. I won the entire event at Outflank, and I did play against the Vader list. It was Vader E. Kylo, but at Eudaimonia, I played against my friend Matt, and he brought his Vader Raider. Him and Chud, play a lot together and both practice. They have two slightly different Vader Raider lists. Both of them are a little more on the control spectrum now, and they both play them really beautifully. Those two guys are just like my kryptonite. I went 3-1 because Matt beat me in the second round at Eudaimonia. It's very hard to play around Vader because if you wait for him to reroll, he'll force strike you, and if you are too aggressive on your removal, he still has just perfect opportunities for reroll. He matches you pound for pound on removal for the most part. And I mean, he had no upgrades out. He rerolled his Vader and his Tusken and rolled Tusken 3 for 1, Vader 2, Vader 3. And it was just like, all right, that's all she wrote. And then he even force stroked a 2-side into a 3-side, so that is that his backup muscle was able to finish off Jango. It was a massacre. It's very hard. I've tried a lot of strategies. I try to capitalize on the best defense to just get Vader's dice off the table as best you can. It's hard to play around all the removal that deck has now. It's a very good deck. Try to chew through Vader with all your might. On the Hunt does really well removing Vader dice. Pretty much. I might actually just consider, after the first upgrade or two, just stop playing upgrades and just only spend my money on removal to fight that deck again. But that's a tough one. Good luck. It's a beast.
Yeah, I mean, you're like, a lot of the times when I'm playing against decks, I make a decision whether I'm the control or the aggro, and no matter what deck that I'm playing. Like, if I'm playing an aggro deck, I still make this decision if I need to be the aggressor or if I need to defend against the other person's deck. And this is one of those matchups where I think you're definitely on the control on this. You gotta fight Vader's dice as best as you can. And you mentioned best defense, just using it to get rid of his dice. And it may think like if he's sitting on a 3 or sitting on a 2 and a disrupt or something like that you're kind of wasting it, but that disrupt is very easily going to turn into a 2 or a 3, either from rerolls or from force strikes. So don't be shy of getting rid of a resource die or a disrupt die with a best defense on there. Like, you just have to fight those dice, because there's so many times where I thought I was fine and left those dice sitting on what I thought were bad sides. The next round, they just turned into something else, and I spent too much time dealing with the Tusken Raider.
Yeah, the Vader deck does exactly the same thing that this deck does. You can roll Jango and Bala, and you're looking at, here's a bunch of blanks. Cool, we'll fight dirty and deal damage. I didn't consider that. Well, Vader has the same issue with, he's got all kinds of ways to turn his dice to massive damage. So removing any of his dice is still going to get you a lot of just peace, because now you don't have to worry about those dice turning into something nasty with Force Strike. And if your opponent is sitting on Force Strike, they have a dead card in their hand. That's one less option they have and one less option you have to worry about. So I really agree that, yeah, you got to focus that Vader out. Also, because every time he's activating, you're losing a card, which this deck, although it doesn't have resource restrictions because it's so efficient, you definitely need the cards in your hand to do a lot of things, and losing them from Vader's effect, it hurts real bad. So, all right, the next matchup I definitely want to hear about is, Jabba and whoever. So, Jabba and Vader, Jabba and Dooku, Jabba and Jango. They're not all the same, but, Jabba can help be a choke factor with removing cards, removing resources. On top of that, extra character is usually the damage dealer. So how do you, what's the matchup against Jabba and something else?
Typical Jabba lists or Crime Lord lists is often while you're using him. So first tip is as much as I emphasize the battlefield, claiming early will get you killed. This is a matchup I pass often in, trying to see what Jabba's doing. If he tries to, what is he focusing for? What is he trying to do? Playing around discard, in my opinion, is a little easy in this deck, because one of the things I like about this deck is it's very disposable, and that discarding is something you tend to do anyway to get the damage out and whatever. So definitely against Jabba lists, like, resolve early, respect how much money they have. You know, when you're staring at the discards, make sure if you're sitting on certain cards like backup muscle and stuff, get it on the table or try to go for a fight dirty before you lose it. I haven't really had a lot of trouble with Jabba. My deck kind of hits hard enough that his speed hurts him a lot. You know, he's a very slow character. And then, you know, depends on who's he's paired up against with. You know, Jango Jabba, you're only dealing with one color. It doesn't hit as hard as usual lists. I mean, they can do a lot of the tricks you're doing. You know, he does have holdout blaster, does have jetpack, does have on the hunts, and they can fight dirty back. But your deck tends to be a little more consistent and has some better options overall. Jabba, while Vader is like a very high pressure and uphill battle, I wanted to mention, you know, I feel like, you know, this deck is capable of beating Vader Raider. It's tricky to say like exactly like how favored it is, because I've just got mostly trounced by it lately. In my experience, it's been the reverse, where I haven't run into a Jabba list that's caused me too much stress. You have a lot of damage already sitting in your characters, so Jabba making you discard your stronger upgrades, you know, like heroes tend to have trouble if you remove a lot of their damage options, but this villain deck, you know, has the focus, has the damage already like baked in, and you just have to identify like, is Jabba the scary one or is his friend the scary one, and just go all in. And again, like, their shields won't do much if you play around on the hunt, on the hunt and things like that. Your removal is almost as consistent as theirs.
Yeah, blue-based Jabba decks, I've seen a lot of people saying, asking who to go after first. And one of the things that always pops up is who they're holocroning onto. And I don't think that matters in the slightest. I think you need to get rid of Jabba first, no matter what. Even with Vader, and especially with Dooku, you get rid of Jabba and you reduce their options. You get rid of 2 focus sides. You get rid of the ability to play a lot of their yellow cards. You get rid of the ability for them to naturally play out Crime Lord. Then they have to do it with an ace in the hole and naturally roll that or discard cards to get to it. So I don't think it matters any one bit who they're holocroning onto with a blue-based Jabba deck. You just have to go after Jabba. It seems kind of bad when you got Vader sitting across from you, but one Vader die is not too hard to manage. And again, like Jay said, if you're discarding, you don't need a whole lot of upgrades in this deck to get running with. So if you have to discard a holdout blaster or discard a jetpack, it's not going to be the end of the world. But getting Crime Lorded really does suck. But against Jango, that point, I don't know if Jabba is the main target in there. They're more likely to beat you on damage, whereas the blue-based ones are usually going for a discard or a mill strategy or all in on Crime Lord. So that's just what I think.
Okay, and then let's talk about the Skybar matchup.
So, again, with the addition of On the Hunt, it does wonders dealing with all those shields, being able to remove loot die. This matchup's gotten interesting because, amusingly enough, the people that I've seen play it, and this will probably confuse a lot of you, but a lot of loot bar players have been cutting leadership, putting in other options for more defense, which is fine. But it's been weird for my testing purposes. So knowing that, typically I can just ignore Ackbar, use removal on his double focus if he gets it. But I mean, I used to try and go for the early kill to prevent leadership shenanigans and get the reset. In these like big guy, little guy pair ups, I mean, if you can chew through Vader, if you can chew through loot, and now again it's way easier because you have better options of getting through the shields and the defense. Once you kill the big guy, the little dude will probably, flounder against you. And I I've often been really bloodthirsty on Bala resets in a lot of my matchups, and I notice a lot of those times where I try to go all in to get that reset, I don't tend to win those games. So a lot of, or at least those are games where I had more trouble in matchups where it's like two characters and there's a definite, major threat, being able to knock them down and get those dice and get those effects and upgrades off the board is your goal. Even with Bala, just try and go in and kill the Titan, so to speak. Again, it's trickier in sets with Jango Veers because they're pretty even, and Veers actually does more damage. It's just Jango's effect is what you're playing around. So again, that's when I started definitely taking out Veers. Although killing Jango gets rid of electroshock, there's a lot of factors, but we already spoke about that list.
And have you faced the Hyperloop deck yet?
The only testing I've done with Hyperloop is me playing it. You have a lot of options from the word go that deal with a naked Falcon die. So there are things you can do. You have tactical mastery. Early in the game, most of your goal is to knock off one of the higher guns, so things then flank is active, and then you can flank the die. The deck has a lot of ways of dealing with those threats. I mean, I built it to have just an ungodly amount of removal. So hit hard, try to make sure flank's online so that setup doesn't go. Obviously choose your own battlefield first to force them to hyperloop to get their battlefield to get the air quotes set up. Don't let Poe resolve a special side on the first 2 turns. Obviously, I don't know. There's just things. There's so many first 2 turn things that need to happen for that deck that people like to think are really reliable that aren't. And your deck, this deck just capitalizes on countering that really well.
Yeah, and your deck can do plenty of early damage. You have things like Arm to the Teeth that allow you to do damage without rolling out, things like that. So I don't think that this would be a bad matchup for that deck at all. I think you could easily get to the point where they don't even want to hyperloop because they're just too far behind to be able to catch up.
Okay, and then the final matchup, you see a lot of rogue decks, so things like, 4 Stormtroopers or 2 Stormtroopers, 2 Night Sisters, Kylo and friends, Phasma and friends, things like that. Do you just have any specific advice or tips that this deck has in those matchups?
I mean, once you reach 3+ characters, Bala definitely gets scarier. I have a lot of experience against trooper swarms because a couple of guys around here really latch onto those lists, or at least they did. Yeah, you pick off the weakest link and get those Bala triggers. Obviously, in those matchups, I try to equip Bala a little heavier than Jango to get the most impact out of those. But really, that's kind of it's where the deck kind of started, and what made me fall in love with Bala were these 3 character metas that were shaping up in the swarm lists, and just letting him go to town. This is what Bala likes. In those situations, you usually go for the weakest, easiest target to, again, remove dice, and then assess who's the scary one, air quotes, who has the most weapons or whatever. And so I usually, pick off the weak link, or enlist, Triple Trooper and Night Sister, or Trooper and Tusken Raider. I mean, killing the oddball usually removes whatever reason they're running that color, so you get rid of yellow, get rid of the electroshots, get rid of blue, get rid of use the force and blue upgrades and deflect and all that stuff. So definitely keep that in mind. I'll just say you're advantaged against swarm lists. I mean, respect to them, because if they did a really good, they drop an upgrade and then they squad tactics, that could be terrifying. The decks, that make me sweat are Vader Raider, Jango Veers, just because you have to play the Jango dance. But now with the upgrades I put into the deck, I feel like you're in a really solid position in that matchup now. So those are the ones that cause me the most stress. Beyond that, you should be on equal or advantaged footing.
Have you played against any mirror matches yet?
I have, yes. But in my experience, some local guys who listen to the podcast and Tiny, they made some versions of the deck with some more expensive choices in it, IQAs, thermals, a lot of dug-ins, which are interesting. I don't think that card's bad, and that if I do ever remove a tactical mastery, which I don't think I will, but if I did, it would probably be replaced by a dug-in. But again, that's countered by another card in the deck already. In the mirror, I mean, you have to play Jango shenanigans, who loses their Bala first. It's basically how much mastery over the deck do you have and how familiar you are with it, because in these instances of playing it, I mean, I've already played this deck close to 50 times, if not more now. I've played it a lot. And I could tell my opponents hadn't played it as much and made, focused on their own characters. Or one of my opponents, he rolled 7 on the first round and I couldn't get around it. And I'm sorry, this wasn't the mirror. This was against Younglings. I played against Younglings and he rolled a perfect 7. And so he decided to pop off the Trooper when he probably should have thrown that, even though I had some shields on Bala. Probably should have threatened Bala a lot harder, but sometimes getting a dice off is valuable too. And Bala was at 3 shields at the point because I started with them, and then he rolled. Yeah, it's just how the game turned out.
Yeah, I mean, that could be a pretty good tactic to get rid of that Stormtrooper, because you get rid of, 6 cards are now useless in your deck when you do that, though. And
yeah,
arguably flank as well, but you can still get some use out of that. So you lose tactical mastery, best defense, and cannon fodder when you take out the Stormtrooper.
Yeah, and I definitely drew those, and they just did nothing. So I'm sure some of you were probably thinking, what? Why would you ever go for the Trooper? I mean, keep that in mind when you're playing against this deck. You remove a lot of its versatility. That's 100% true. So yeah, it's interesting. If there are Troopers teetering, sometimes it's worth it to just, finish him, so to speak.
You kind of mentioned it, but I was, wanting to think about cards that you didn't use in this deck. You kind of touched on it with Dug In, that you would maybe think about putting that in there. But what about things like Probe? I've seen Probe being played a lot in my meta. It's the villain common red card where you cost 0 and you look at 2 random cards from your opponent's hand and discard any of those that are events. Have you seen a lot of that in where you're playing now?
I saw it in the mirror, and I see villains use it a lot. It's a very, very, very good card. But Probe and Unpredictable fill in the same, very, very fuzzy game space for me, where it's sometimes I'll play this, and it will do absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to like that. It's very stressful to me. The choices that I have over it are just cards that sometimes you don't have an opportunity to use the cards that I use instead. Again, there aren't always opportunities for tactical mastery. And again, as another option, Probe's really great. Sometimes I play Probe and it doesn't make my game state any better, even with the information. And information's great, but just the whole concept of my deck is either I'm killing you harder or I'm being safer, and that's all I care about. And that card is a little bit of information, slightly safer, slightly, they can't discard as much. Maybe you'll hit a really impactful event. And I mean, when that card's good, it's gold. And it's another 0-coster, which I respect a lot. It's great. I think it barely doesn't make the cut. And then right behind that, again, we have Dug In. If you want to run Unpredictable and you trust it, go for it. Tiny and I have talked a lot about it, and it's just there's just too many opportunities where it just hurts. So it's just a tricky card to it's literally unpredictable. You can't rely on it. But another one, I still like Promotion. I feel like it's also past some of these cards, but Promotion is still fairly strong for all the things it does. If you want to run an IQA or you want to run a thermal, sometimes you're plus on money, sometimes you want to overwrite, a holdout blaster or something, and I can understand that. You're you're hurting your game speed and your reliability. So keep those in mind. I don't think you need the thermal to help you against swarm lists. I mean, doing 9, doing 12 is incredible. You know, like when it works, it works. But you're not really getting too much out of the discard sides. I never complain. Actually, I don't mind going for the discard on the hunt, but there are a lot of times where on the hunt isn't like hitting what you need. But still, it's in there for both its offensive and defensive capabilities. I'm trying to think if there's any other.
What about disarm?
That's an interesting one. A lot of people have talked to me, and I used to be like, disarm goes in every deck. It's how you deal with holocron. It's how you deal with whatever. Now, having played much more of the game, what I've come to realize is disarm, it only hits decks that I feel like you already have the tools to deal with. Yes, it can be useful in Jango Veers, like you can knock off their F11. Like the best thing you can hit with it is the F11. I'm not even as jazzed about hitting jetpacks unless it's on the damage side and you disarm it and you get rid of it in the round in the like, you know, perfectly crafted, you know, order of events. But most of the time you're sacrificing damage to prevent damage. But it doesn't hit the things that I'm actually scared of. Like you can't disarm a mind probe. You can't disarm a force throw. It's very hard to disarm, you know, like the Kylo Saber. I don't really think it's worth disarming a holdout blaster or a DH-17 or, you know, it's really only super valuable against those niche cases with jetpack and, you know, hitting F11s is great. And if you like it, you know, again, it's a very good card, and there's a lot of decks that should run it. But for the you know, deal damage or die gameplay that this deck is going for, it's in the middle. It doesn't really do either.
Yeah, I can see that, definitely.
And one big thing we definitely wanted to talk about, you know, we've gone over the deck, the matchup. I wanted you to give us some insight on the deck construction, because this is one of the few decks that is doing excessively well in tournament scenes that doesn't need a single legendary. So can you know, people have been talking about, you know, the difficulty of product being released. Last week, Corey said that, you know, FFG is actively printing as much as they can, as fast as they can, trying to get the game to as many people as possible. But if, you know, you're just not able to get a lot of product, or you don't want to spend a lot of money on, you know, Vaders and Jabbas, this is a very strong option for not a lot. So can you capitalize, like talk about which cards might be the tougher ones to get your hands on and whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, it's you got, again, no legendaries in here. You're only running 12, or actually 10 rares outside of the characters. So really the holdout blasters, I think they're probably the most expensive card in the deck. Other than that, you got maybe jetpack being maybe hard to find because of a lot of people running Jango Veers and things like that. But again, it's only really 10 rares in the deck outside of characters, no legendaries, and there's really no legendary that would make this deck any better at all. I couldn't even think of a single legendary you'd want in this deck.
Yeah, again, the only thing I tested before was like thermal, and it just wasn't necessary. You know, thermal's a good, very fun card. I love it to death, but it doesn't actually accelerate any of your game plan any better than any of the other upgrades that you're running, and its cost like matters a lot. So yeah, the nice thing, you know, people ask, like, I know a lot of people play Jango Veers, A, because it's efficient and easy, and B, it's super cheap, and you know, I find this deck to be, you know, what should be the evolution of that deck, more or less. You get more health. It opens up more defensive options. Again, like, yes, Jango Veers will still sometimes just, you know, oops, I win. Yeah, exactly. Vader will oops, I win too. And like sometimes playing the more oops, I win style will win you more games in like the grand scheme of things. But one of the things I like about this deck is you just learn a lot about the game. Just heck of a lot about the game, like learning when to react with Jango and how to properly use all of your cards. And again, like a lot of people like to knock aggro as like brainless, and this deck is very, very, very far and away from brainless. So there's just a lot to gain out of playing a deck like this, and I think this deck plays around a lot of the strengths of Destiny as a whole.
Yeah, thermal you touched on it's much better in a discard strategy. Most of the times that I've seen thermals played, they re-roll those specials almost every time, because they're only really playing it for the 1 and 2 discard sides. Every once in a while against a swarm deck, the special is very relevant, but it's not their primary win conditions, so they just want to mill you with it. Those sides are just actively bad in this deck, I think. The discard sides.
Awesome. Are there any last thoughts about this deck, or, tips for players when they're going to their local events, getting their feet wet with this bad boy?
Kind of what I was saying a moment ago, like this deck isn't quite as easy as it looks. Definitely understand, and this is kind of a tip for all decks that we're noticing now, is like a little bit of upgrades goes a long way, and try and focus more on maximizing your removal options and pay close attention to what exactly is the threat that's coming from your opponent. Early on, I've made mistakes of like always trying to remove damage dice, when if that wasn't like putting any of my characters in a threatening range, and then I don't have removal on my next hand, and then that's when they drop the force throw or whatever. Try to just get an idea of where damage is going. One of the very first things, if they have a low amount of damage, is try to figure out against this deck who they find the threat is. Some people go for Jango first, some people go for Bala. Once you know that, you can play around it, but if you're too aggressive on spending your removal before you know who they're actually afraid of, you may equip the wrong guy, or walk into some traps or some unnecessary damage. So sometimes, if they have 1 or 2 damage or 3 damage showing, it can be safe to let them resolve it and just know, like, okay, they don't like Bala, okay, they don't like Jango, because you'll run into both. And like one of the strengths of playing this deck is like creating the threat. I tend to upgrade Jango first, but sometimes I can tell when people are just like scared of Jango, if they're like passing a lot of early actions and stuff, I'll go all in on Bala instead. Just be aware and try and suss out what exactly they're afraid of, and you'll get more health and more damage out of your deck in the long run knowing that information. And again, also respect your shield sides. Bala rolls shields. Sometimes focusing jetpack into shield is really good, or if you just roll the jetpack shield, sometimes it's not worth discarding a good card to try and maybe get damage. Take those shields. They do wonders.
We here at the Knights of Ren are super proud to announce that we are a sponsor of the Steel Open 2017, happening April 7th through 9 in Herndon, Virginia. You can find out more information at steelopen.com, where you can find out the events for not only Destiny, but X-Wing, Armada, and so much more. And you can also register yourself for this 3-day super amazing private event. Definitely check this out if you're interested in Destiny or any kind of Star Wars tabletop events. This is the premier place to check out games and get ready for Worlds, because this is happening 1 month before Worlds. You don't want to miss out. SteelOpen.com. All right, well, that is pretty much the end of the show. Thank you guys so much, Jay. Much appreciation for just going into, a lot of deep thought and just discussion about how this deck is, what it does, how to play it, what to play against, and things of that nature. You spent a lot of time testing it. We've talked about it for weeks. We've just kind of put a lot of effort into it. And now that it's starting to see the light of day, it's really exciting, because not only is it efficient, but there's multiple ways to play it, and it's very, very fun. And that's a big thing for me, is like there's certain decks that only do one specific thing, kind of like Hyperloop. It really is only meant to do 1 or 2 things. This deck can do like 5 or 6 things, and so it's really fun, it's really flexible. And thank you everyone for listening. We have just had a blast this month with all of the stuff that we've been doing, and we just want to shout out a big thank you to our Patreons. Thank you to each and every person who has supported us, no matter if it's $1, if it's $4, 40 if it's somewhere in between. We are so thankful for this community, and if you've been listening to the show and you've been enjoying the content, enjoying the deck lists, we would really appreciate your help to our Patreon, because we're going to be using that to get prizes into your hands, as well as getting this entire team over to Worlds, so that we can not only cover it, but we can bring exclusive content with people such as, Lucas and Corey, and, get their input on some of the new stuff if it comes out, and just things like that. And we can't do that without your assistance. So thank you, everyone. It's been a blast. Thank you for joining us, and may the Force be with you.